Dorian Trevor Sykes, the bank robber, crime novelist, and Rolls-Royce Cullinan getaway. There are crime stories that sound like they were written for a movie. And then there are stories where the person accused of committing the crimes actually wrote books about the criminal world. Dorian Trevor Sykes is one of those unusual cases. Sykes is a Detroit crime novelist whose books focus on street life, crime, money, and survival. But outside of fiction, his own life has included a lengthy history of bank robberies, federal prison sentences, and, most recently, a series of 2025 bank and credit union robberies that ended with a dramatic police pursuit involving a rented Rolls-Royce Cullinan. And perhaps the most unusual part of his story is that while he was building a career as an author, he was also accumulating a criminal history that would eventually send him back to federal prison. The books. There has been some confusion over exactly how many books Dorian Sykes has written. Some media reports have described him as the author of 8 or 9 crime novels. Bibliographic databases list additional titles, including books published under different series names and collaborative works. A publication order bibliography lists these titles. March 2011, Going All Out. November 2011, Going All Out 2. April 2012, King of Detroit. January 2013, Going All Out 3. May 2013, King of Detroit II. September 2016, Love Don't Love Nobody. July 2020, The Good Life. April 2021, The Re-Up. January 2022, A New Generation. June 2025, Born to Die. May 2026, Queen of Hearts. Other bibliographies also attribute works such as The Lost Jewels, Chopper City, My Hida 2, Truth Be Told, and My Biggest Losses to Sykes. Chopper City was a collaborative work with Christopher Dorsey. Because different sources count standalone novels, collaborations, series editions, and independently published books differently, it is safest to say that Sykes has written at least 9 novels, with bibliographic sources identifying 11 individually listed titles and additional works. His publishing history is important because Sykes wasn't simply someone who wrote one book while incarcerated. He developed a continuing career as an urban fiction author. Which you published Dorian Sykes. One of the most important names connected to Sykes' writing career is Urban Books, the publishing company associated with author and publisher Carl Weber. Reports have stated that Sykes had multiple novels published through Urban Books. Carl Weber has also discussed Sykes' sales, saying that individual Sykes novels sold as many as approximately 2,500 copies. That number gives us an interesting way to estimate the size of Sykes' publishing career. If we use approximately 25,000 books sold over his entire career as a reasonable working estimate and use a traditional publishing royalty range of roughly $1 to $2 per book, Sykes' estimated personal royalty income from his books would be approximately 25,000 books, $25,000. 25,000 books, $50,000. So, based on those assumptions, Sykes likely generated somewhere around $25,000 to $50,000 in author royalties over several years. But there is an important distinction. That is an estimate, not a verified financial statement. We do not have Sykes' publishing contracts, royalty statements, or tax records publicly available, so nobody can responsibly say exactly how much money he personally earned from his books. The actual retail revenue generated by the books would have been substantially higher because the retail price of a book is not the same thing as the author's royalty. Still, the 25,000 50,000 estimate gives us a useful comparison when looking at the other side of Sykes' life. The bank robbery money. Sykes' criminal history goes back much further than the 2025 case. In 2002, Sykes participated in a bank robbery involving nearly $200,000. Federal court records show that he was convicted of bank robbery, using or carrying a firearm during a crime of violence, being a felon in possession of a firearm, and perjury. In February 2005, the federal court sentenced him to 174 months, 14 years and 6 months on the principal case. There was also a separate 60-month sentence for perjury, with portions of the sentences running concurrently. This distinction is important because some reports have described his original punishment as approximately 17 years. The more precise figure in the federal court record is 174 months, or 14.5 years, on the principal sentence, plus the separate perjury punishment. So we should not simply state that he received 17 years for bank robbery. The 2019 return to bank robbery. After serving his federal prison sentence, Sykes eventually returned to society. But his criminal history did not end there. In 2019, he committed another bank robbery only weeks after completing his earlier federal sentence. He later pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 68 months, 5 years and 8 months, for bank robbery. He also received concurrent sentences connected to violations of his supervised release. He was eventually released from that period of incarceration in February 2024. That means that by the time the 25 robberies occurred, Sykes was not a first-time offender. He had already spent many years in federal prison for bank robbery and related crimes. The 2025 robberies. Then came March 2025. Federal prosecutors accused Sykes of a series of robberies involving banks and credit unions. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, between March 6 and March 12, 2025, Sykes robbed or attempted to rob several financial institutions. He eventually pleaded guilty to 4 counts of bank or credit union robbery and 1 count of attempted bank robbery. The government said the robberies produced more than $20,000 in total proceeds. 2 of the robberies received particular attention. One involved Credit Union 1 in Sterling Heights. Another involved a Chase Bank in Lathrop Village. And this is where the story took a very unusual turn. The Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The getaway vehicle wasn't an old stolen car. It was a white Rolls-Royce Cullinan SUV. Reports said the vehicle had been rented for a substantial amount of money, with Fox 2 reporting a rental cost of approximately $1,750 per day. During the Chase robbery, investigators say Sykes used the luxury SUV as his getaway vehicle. According to reports, approximately $13,569 was taken in the 2 highlighted robberies, approximately $10,169 from Credit Union 1 and $3,400 from Chase. That means the amount of money allegedly obtained in those robberies was actually small compared with the cost and risk of the getaway operation. And then came the chase. The high-speed chasey. Investigators eventually located Sykes near the MGM Grand Detroit. When police attempted to stop him, prosecutors said he fled in the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. A high-speed pursuit followed. The same luxury SUV that had been used as the alleged getaway vehicle became the vehicle involved in the police pursuit. The Rolls-Royce was eventually recovered with significant damage. And the vehicle itself became one of the most memorable details of the case. A man with a long history of bank robbery, who also happened to be an urban fiction novelist, was now accused of fleeing police in a Rolls-Royce Cullinan after another bank robbery. The money comparison. This is where Sykes' life presents an unusual financial comparison. On the legitimate side, his writing career may have generated approximately $25,000 to $50,000 in author royalties, assuming approximately 25,000 books sold, and traditional royalties averaging about $1 to $2 per book. Again, that is an estimate. On the criminal side, his 2002 bank robbery involved nearly $200,000. The 2 highlighted 2025 robberies produced approximately $13,569, according to reports. And the government said the broader series of 2025 robberies involved more than $20,000. But comparing those numbers is not simply a question of which career made more money. The money from the books represented legitimate income generated through writing and publishing. The bank robbery money came with enormous consequences: arrests, convictions, prison sentences, supervised release violations, and, ultimately, another federal prosecution. In other words, even if the criminal activity produced more money in a particular incident, the long-term financial and personal cost was enormous. The federal case. On October 1, 2025, Sykes pleaded guilty in federal court to 4 counts of bank and credit union robbery and 1 count of attempted bank robbery. That guilty plea is significant. At that point, the case was no longer simply an accusation. Sykes had admitted guilt to those federal offenses. Each of the robbery and attempted robbery counts carried a statutory maximum of 20 years in federal prison, along with a potential fine of up to $250,000. But the statutory maximum does not automatically mean that Sykes will receive 20 years. Federal sentencing involves numerous factors, including the federal sentencing guidelines, specific conduct involved, the defendant's criminal history, prior convictions, acceptance of responsibility, and other circumstances. And Sykes' criminal history is significant. He had already received a lengthy federal sentence for bank robbery. He had subsequently received another 68-month sentence. He was released in February 2024. And the 2025 robberies occurred relatively soon after his release. That history could make the federal court view the 2025 conduct much more seriously than it would view the case of a first-time offender. This is where we have to be precise. Sykes pleaded guilty in October 2025, but we should not state an exact final prison sentence unless we have the actual federal sentencing judgment confirming it. The government established that he faced potentially substantial federal punishment, with the individual robbery counts carrying maximum penalties of up to 20 years. Given his prior federal convictions and the fact that the 2025 offenses occurred after his release from prison, it would be reasonable to expect a significant federal sentence. But an estimate is not the same thing as a sentence. The safest wording is that Sykes was facing potentially many years in federal prison, and his substantial criminal history could support a sentence considerably longer than what a first-time offender might receive. The final chapter. Dorian Trevor Sykes' story is unusual because two very different lives seem to have existed side by side. One was the author. The other was the bank robber. As an author, Sykes produced urban crime fiction and established a publishing relationship with Urban Books. As a criminal defendant, he accumulated a history that included multiple bank robberies, federal prison terms, and repeated contact with the justice system. He had already spent more than a decade behind bars. He came home. He returned to crime. He went back to prison. He was released again in 2024. And within a relatively short period of time, prosecutors say he was back robbing financial institutions. This time, however, the getaway vehicle was a Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The pursuit through Detroit added another unbelievable chapter to the story. And perhaps the biggest irony is that Sykes had spent years writing about the criminal world. In 2025, prosecutors said he was living it. His books created fictional stories about crime, money, and survival. His criminal history created real court records, prison sentences, and victims. And in the end, the Rolls-Royce Cullinan getaway wasn't the ending of one of his novels. It was part of the evidence in another federal criminal case. For Dorian Trevor Sykes, the difference between writing about crime and being prosecuted for crime became impossible to ignore.